You're listening to Glove Up or Shut Up on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
And welcome everybody to another episode of Glove Up or Shut Up right here at AngryMarks.com. My name is Peter Rach. I'm joined once again by my co-host from Omaha, Nebraska, Stevie J.
Peter, I'm going to declare total victory on this show, but that's only because there was a 1FC show by the same name on Saturday morning. And then there was a total victory for Luke Rockhold later in the evening in the Rockhold versus Branch main event of UFC Fight Night in Pittsburgh.
And Stevie, I just want your opinion just off the top, just your off-the-cuff response to the super fight in boxing we had this past weekend with a majority draw.
Very disappointing. Not in terms of the fight, but in terms of the judging and scoring. In fact, I think I want to quote my friend Frank Vaughn, aka Nikes the Sneaker Pimp, when he said there is no way Canelo won 10 of those rounds. That judge was on drugs.
I had it, like most people had it, 7 rounds to 5 for Triple G, so how Canelo got that score from one judge. I even commented on your Facebook saying, cough, cough, never leave it, something, something judges.
Which is why I responded, hey, at least they were listening in Pittsburgh because only 2 fights went to the judges all night long.
Exactly. And let's start with that card right now. Main event was, well, it didn't go to the judges, really, did it?
No, not, like I said, only 2 fights all night.
David Branch and Luke Rockhold, and, you know, Branch came in, he was game for this fight. I gotta give it to him.
No, in the first round, he actually was the dominant fighter. I would even go so far as to give him the 10-9 because he was pushing Rockhold around the cage. He was battering him with hooks and uppercuts. He had him pinned against the fence and wasn't letting him go anywhere or do anything. You could see Rockhold was looking for leg trips, was looking for takedowns, but he wasn't having much success, and when he did, Branch was quick to recover and kept on battering him, and early on that really looked effective. It's like, man, if he could keep pressuring like this and pin Rockhold against the cage and just tire him out, this could be his fight all night long. And then all it took was one good takedown in the second round, and Rockhold slipped so easily into full mount. I mean, it was one of those reminders that you can forget when you haven't seen Luke Rockhold for a year just how good he is, but Branch is not a slouch on the ground, and Rockhold made that transition so easily. It was like, holy crap, Branch is in trouble. And you immediately knew it, just looking at the way he slid into that, and he started mercilessly pounding on him. And Branch gave up his back trying to get away from it, and it's like, oh, that's worse. Now he can choke him out. And then he turned over again, and he was still getting pounded on. He was being warned by the referee to fight back. It's like, this ain't gonna end well for David Branch. And it was going so well in the first round, but all it took was one Luke Rockhold takedown, and that all fell apart.
Like, how much time did he have left in that round? It's like, you're not surviving the round, buddy.
No, he verbally tapped to the strikes with 55 seconds left because he knew he couldn't take that kind of punishment.
We're not talking pitter-patter punches here, that's for sure.
No, Luke Rockhold is not a small or unassuming middleweight fighter. He is a big, strong guy. In fact, he made that point in his post-fight promo. He said, George St. Pierre, don't take the fight. Drop out now. You're not big enough for this. You're not ready for this. You don't belong in this division. Get out. Give me the fight. It's my fight.
Wow. Strong words by a strong man, and, you know, it's going to be an interesting fight between GSP and Bisping because from what I've heard, Bisping says this could be his last fight, and GSP said he's going to retire for good once he loses a fight here. So it looks like the GSP Bisping fight could be a loser leaves town match.
If those are what the two fighters are saying, then that's how they feel, but their contracts for employment with WME IMG, that could be a completely different matter.
But we've seen fighters who say, I'm going to retire after this fight, or I'm going to retire if I lose. it lends itself to one of two scenarios. Either it's going to be a boring fight, or they're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink against each other.
Well, I don't think GSP is going to lack for motivation, given that he's been off for a little while now, and that Bisping is continually talking trash about him, including calling him an inflated lightweight.
He didn't say that, did he?
I'm pretty sure he did. If not, somebody else that's friends with him did. But either way, that trash talk has definitely entered the realm. But we're getting a little far afield from the Rockhold versus Branch card. Why don't we get back to that?
All right, Mike Perry and Alex Reyes.
Platinum Mike Perry. And don't forget it. He will remind you if you do.
Is there platinum in that knee of his?
Yeah, I would say so, because it was hard as platinum, and it definitely left Alex Reyes feeling the sting. He was done the moment that knee cracked into his jaw.
Now, Anthony Smith and Hector Lombard. We talked about this fight in length last week. Stevie, which Lombard did we see here?
Well, you know what? I think actually what we saw was not Hector Lombard at his best or his worst. I think we saw a very slow start from Anthony Smith, which he admitted in the post-fight interview. He said, "This is a problem for me. I don't come out in the first round. I have to get knocked around a little bit." But in the second round, you could see him starting to build up some steam when he caught Lombard with a few good shots, and then he really started trash talking his way over to Hector Lombard. Like, "Do you know me now? Do you remember my name now?" And then in the third round, he just came out and kept pouring it on with his offense until the referee had to step in because Hector Lombard was clearly on Dream Street.
He didn't say my name, say my name.
No, he didn't go out there and sing Destiny's Child, but I would say that we did see destiny arrive for Anthony Smith, because for him, a victory over a well-known opponent like this was a long time coming. And the one thing that Lombard had in his arsenal that he thought was going to work was to just chop away at Anthony Smith's legs. He was trying to chop him down like a tree. And it was making Anthony Smith change up his stance and step a little gingerly, but it wasn't taking the power out of his hands. And Hector Lombard could not stand up to that power when he got hit with the left jab and the right hook. It was over.
All right, let's move on to Jason Gonzalez against Gregor Gillespie.
You know, I have to say this first before we actually talk about the fight. Mm-hmm. Our announce team for this fight was just gushing over Gregor Gillespie. And I'm not saying they don't have the right to, because he's undefeated, 9-0, and considered a big prospect at lightweight, but man, you'd have thought he was already in the top 15 the way they were talking.
Well, maybe they were getting instructions via the headset.
What, this is Vince McMahon's world now?
The comparisons have been made before.
Well, anyway, I will say that at least the hype lived up to the fight, because that first 5 minutes may be 5 of the best minutes of mixed martial arts the entire year, and I dare you to disagree with me.
Nope.
Anybody who hasn't already seen this, you can even pause this show right now, stop what you're doing, go find a replay of that, go find a video of that, go find a torrent. I don't care what you have to do. Watch this 5 minutes, because they literally just stand there and fry Takayama the hell out of each other. Just punch, each trying to knock the other one down, and they're both getting bruised and battered, and Gonzalez is bleeding from everywhere, and he's not going down, he's not quitting. It's just an amazing show of resilience and heart by two men who didn't give a damn and decided to throw shots.
And, you know, the crowd loved it. It wasn't like the crowd wasn't appreciative of these fighters' efforts.
Mm-hmm. In the second round, Gonzalez tried to get a fast start to mimic the first round, and he threw a head kick right away. but I guess that put him off balance because Gillespie easily took him down off that and worked his way to the full mount. I mean, once again, like the Luke Rockhold full mount, you knew this was bad news by how quickly and effortlessly he got it. I shouldn't say effortlessly because you trained for years to make it look that easy, so there was a lot of effort to make it that easy. But it was, and he was just pounding on Gonzalez for top. And this was not the ideal situation for Gonzalez because on his feet, he was able to give as good as he gets, but on his back, all that blood that he had already accumulated was, instead of leaking out of his nose or onto his opponent or onto the canvas, was draining backward into his mouth and his throat. And I'm sure that was making it really hard for him to breathe, making it hard for him to fight back. And then, on top of that, Gillespie cinched up that rear or arm triangle choke, and there was just nothing he could do at that point because he was already battered, beaten up, couldn't breathe, and caught in an arm triangle. It was over.
Yeah, there was no wiggle room in that arm triangle choke. Sometimes we see the fighter can fight out of it, or, the time will run out, or he'll last the end of the round, or something like that. But when that choke got in, it was like, you're screwed, buddy.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's move on to the next fight here, which was Usman and Moraes.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to skip right ahead to the ending, and then I'm going to let you talk about the fight. I want to say what the winners said. Get ready for me. I'm a problem.
Well, Usman wins the fight via a knockout. It didn't take him long, only 2 minutes and 48 seconds. His opponent got knocked the F out, basically.
Yeah, to the point where the camera angle didn't really show how good this right was the first time it landed.
No.
But then you saw Sergio Moraes not able to get up. Like, he was sitting on the canvas on his butt, and he wasn't standing up, and he wasn't moving. It's like, yeah, you couldn't stand up right now if you wanted to. If you stood up, your legs would buckle and you'd face plant. That's how hard you got hit by this right hand. And then they showed the alternate camera angle on the replay, and it was like, ooh, Usman cracked him.
And, I love the post-fight promo. I'm just, in that division, there's so many different, how do I say this? There's so many different opponents you can put in front of him next, but there's so many different styles as well. I mean, I'm not sure who you put in front of him next because there's at least 5 or 10 good options for him there.
I can't disagree with you there. I think Usman has a lot of potential matchups, but I know he's definitely got a few people in mind that he would like to face.
But will they book it?
Yeah, I don't know if they'll book Rafael dos Anjos and Usman, but I think if promos can get you what you want, he certainly went a long way toward getting it, because he called him out by name and said, you don't belong here, you're a lightweight, go back to lightweight, and if you don't, I'll prove it to you.
Alright, let's move on to the last fight of the main card, and that was Zhu Aniru against Justin Ledet.
Just call him Zulu. The announcers were calling him Zulu.
Okay, Zulu and Ledet.
Yeah, this was underwhelming, disappointing, and quite frankly, the Pittsburgh crowd was not having it because they had seen so many great fights in the preliminary card that watching two heavyweights just plod around each other was not their thing. Now, Ledet used an effective strategy, which is why he ended up winning the split decision, which was to stand in front of Zulu and throw a jab, and Zulu had little to no defense for this jab. Either he couldn't see it coming, or he couldn't time it properly to get out of the way. And then later it was swelling his right eye shut to the point where he literally couldn't see it coming. And the only time Zulu had any chance was in the third round when he just said, screw it, I'm already down 2 rounds to none and I can't see out of one eye, so I'm just going to chase this guy and throw haymakers at him and hope I can land one of them. And Well, that didn't work out for him. It was a good effort. He might have smacked him a couple of times with a really good right, but it wasn't enough. The good night right that he calls his power in his hand didn't drop Ledet. It might have hurt him a little bit, but it didn't drop him.
Well, let's move on to the prelim card. There were a couple of notable fights here. Sometimes prelim fights don't get the proper attention on this show because, you know, we have a lot of fights to cover, but I do want to mention a couple of these fights. And let's start with Uriah Hall in his fight against
Krzysztof Jotko.
Thank you. I had, for some reason, the wrong name there. Yeah, it was a hell of a victory for Hall, and, you know, some people are saying that, you know, a loss here, a significant loss here would really damage his chances of maintaining his spot in the UFC.
Yeah, Hall was in some trouble coming into this fight in terms of his recent record, and he was in even more trouble in the first round because Jotko put a massive beating on him. I scored it 10-8 because Hall got rocked, he was hurt standing, and Jotko was pouring it on with right hooks and elbows, and then took him to the ground and threw more elbows, and Uriah Hall gave up his back, and he was mounted from behind and getting pounded on from there. This was a tremendously one-sided beating to the point there were times I thought it was going to be stopped. And I thought there was no way, even if Jotko gassed himself out, I thought there was no way that Hall could come back from that kind of beating because he'd still be out of it in the second round. And instead, he hit one perfect right hook, and that was all it took. It's like the announcers were even calling it before it happened. They were saying, the fact that Uriah Hall is still in this fight, you can't count him out because he's got power. And as soon as they said that, boom.
I didn't know Tony Romo was on the broadcast.
Yeah, apparently he was.
Well, for those who don't know, Romo has been announcing NFL games the last 2 weeks now as his new job. And he's like predicting plays, and they come to fruition moments after he says it. So it's kind of like foreshadowing, and it's like, well, same thing here with Hall. It's you don't want to count his power out, and then as soon as you say it, boom, knockout.
Yep. So Hall was, I mean, his post-fight promo was almost better than his victory because he talked a lot about how you can't ever give up. No matter how many times you've lost, no matter how much you've gotten beaten up, you just can't quit. You never give up. You never stop. You get this chance. You can't ever give up. You got to keep fighting no matter what. It was, I'm not doing it justice. It was a tremendous, charismatic, dare I say, babyface promo.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good comparison there. Let's move on to Martin and Aubin Mercier.
This was another fight where I don't think the crowd was very into it. This was the only other fight of the entire card that went to a decision. And what we had here was Aubin Mercier showing that you don't want to get into a tie-up with him or clinch with him because he is such a good takedown artist that he will get you to the ground. But the problem was Tony Martin's defense was on point, and Aubin Mercier couldn't really do a lot with him on the ground. So we had, I'm just going to say it with all apologies to both fighters, a boring fight.
Mm. When you have fighters of similar styles, you run that risk.
Mm-hmm. And I had hopes for Martin too because he had a little bit of a win streak coming in and had really shown a great fight against Hollywood Johnny Case. But I've always tagged Aubin Mercier as a prospect ever since that season of The Ultimate Fighter where he was the runner-up to Chad Lepre. And I feel like we keep seeing what he could be, but he's just not doing all the things that will make people rave about him. It's like, okay, your takedowns are second to none. Your jiu-jitsu is obviously really good. And there were times that Martin was getting very close to being submitted, but not quite. And it's like, there's so much to like about Olivier Aubin Mercier, but he just needs a little more energy, he needs a little more charisma, and he needs a little better strategy to find ways to not just win fights by points, but win in a way that makes people want to see you again. Because as a fighter I interviewed recently said, it's all about giving the fans what they want, and that's what they pay to see.
Well, we had two other fights here. Daniel Spitz beat Anthony Hamilton via TKO at 24 seconds. At first glance, I thought it was an early stoppage, but
No.
we do have replays for a reason. And the replays definitely, the referee made the right call here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the action in the round was so fast it was hard to catch it until you saw the replay, because 24 seconds is not a lot of time for analysis. And take it from me, when we talk about one, I've got a fight that compares to this really well, both in terms of the size and the length of the fight. But there was little to no doubt when you saw the replay that Daniel Spitz had perfectly timed a right hand to the temple and had wobbled Hamilton to the point where he was not going to fight back effectively. He may have gotten up right back after that, but if it hadn't been stopped, he would have just been punished.
And Gilbert Burns beat Jason Sago second round at the 4:55 mark. Yes, at the last 10 seconds, Burns, I guess he heard it and thought, well, let's throw one haymaker and see what happens, and it landed.
This was a hell of a fight to start the card with, and
yeah,
I know I'm enthusiastic about this card, but this card was a lot of fun to watch. And this fight, I love the accuracy and the power that burns through. If you want a textbook example of an overhand right, look at this one, because you can literally picture his hand cracking through a concrete wall. That's how beautiful this punch was.
And, Sago, you look at the result by itself, you think Sago might be in trouble, but it was a good performance. I think they'll keep him around for another fight at least.
No, I don't feel like Sago did poorly. I think Burns was already ahead before the knockout, but I don't think Sago is completely getting smoked. He got caught by one perfect overhand right.
Now, let's talk about ONE FC, because you had a chance to cover those fights, and you already teased it before, so go ahead.
Well, we had a lot of fast fights on this card, and I'm going to start right at the top with Kamari Akhmatov and Gage Estaquio. I'm probably not doing that name justice, but Kamari Akhmatov is a dynamite fighter. He's from Kazakhstan. He's nicknamed the Kazakh. He's 21-1 overall now, and this guy, we talk about how there's nobody for Demetrius Johnson at flyweight because he's already beaten everybody. Well, bring in this guy, because I think his performance in this fight, even though it goes down in the record book as a split decision, just watching Akhmatov, the way he works and the things he brings, I think he would be a potential problem for Demetrius Johnson. I'm not saying he could beat him, but with 5 knockouts and 10 submissions on his record, the guy is good enough to be worthy of top 15 in UFC's flyweight division. The co-main event only went 1 minute and 7 seconds. That was Stefan Rahardian and Sim Bunsrun, a rear naked choke, 1 minute 7 seconds. What else can you say? It was just a total victory. Literally the name of the show. Not even as much so as the heavyweight fight between Alan Egalani and Hideki Sakin. Now, both of these guys are in their 40s, and they're both heavyweights, so you're probably thinking slow fight, boring fight, but Sakin was a former challenger to the heavyweight title, so it's not like he's having bad fights in his 40s, and Egalani is one of these guys that you look at him, it's like looking at Francis Ngannou, where you're just like, man, this guy is jacked up, he's big, he's strong, and Angelani didn't have the greatest record coming in, unfortunately. He was like 3-3 with one draw or something to that effect, but man, he just decided now's the time to show why everybody looks at me and talks about me like I'm a stud, because he threw a knockout punch and the fight was only 11 seconds long. And the worst part was Sakine was trying to sucker him in. He was trying to, I'm not going to touch gloves and then I'm going to charge right at you and try to get a takedown. And he was charging into the punch as Angelani threw it. So it was a doubly devastating knockout because it was a perfect punch, but he was also falling forward into the fist. Ouch.
Not a smart way to do it.
No, Sakine will regret that decision. Now, other fights on this card, we had a lot of fast fights, like I said. We had, here, I'll just tell you all the ones that ended in the first round. We had Samsudin and Macias. That was 2:37 of the first round by TKO, a combination of knees and punches. We had the Papao bad boy, who was really popular in this building. Adrian Matisse beat, and I'm not making this up, I swear to God, Fat Soda by rear naked choke. That is really his name. I know you're giggling, but his name is Fat Soda. He beat him by rear naked choke at 3:11 of the first round. We had Ricky Usmar beat Aldi Nagoyo by knockout at 2 minutes of the first round. And Ty Reedy beat Jerome Pay by knockout 19 seconds into the second round. So that one was round two, as was Ramon Gonzalez versus Delega Lu. That was 152 of the second round by arm triangle choke. So other than the main event, which was a split decision as noted, and one fight that went to the third round, which ended in a knockout, that was Roy Deliguez beating Yago Brian Ferreira de Moraes. We had a lot of excitement on this card, a lot of blink and you miss it kind of action.
So you could say that Soda's fight fell flat?
I actually made that joke in my recap. I said his performance fell flat, so you were close.
Oh boy. Alright, well, we have lots of news to get to, so let's get started. The UFC is debuting in Fresno on December 9th for UFC Fight Night 123.
And have they announced fights for it?
Not yet, but Fresno, I thought already had, like, it's nice they debut in a new city, but that's a city where it's like, wait, you never been to Fresno?
Yeah, you
It's
wouldn't
not that
think
far from Vegas.
No, but I guess probably the reason they haven't is because they're always in Anaheim for fights or San Jose for fights when they go to California.
I guess it's just, I think it's good if you live in the area. It's fine. Like, it's a time where it's like finally we're getting a show. It's sort of like here in Ottawa, we're finally getting a wrestling pay-per-view. Mind you, it's Impact Wrestling, but still.
Yes, I know. You gonna go to all 5 nights of tapings too?
Hell no. I have my limits, my friend.
Yeah, so does Jim Cornette, and apparently it's not going to Canada.
Well, yeah, but that's a border issue. He's done with the company already, so. Let's see. Shogun, it was announced during the UFC show that Shogun is being pulled off this weekend's Japan card. And the UFC was quick to announce Yushin Okami's return to the promotion.
Which was definitely a surprise because I was under the impression that Okami was in Professional Fighters League, formerly known as World Series of Fighting. In fact, his last 2 fights on his record were in one or the other. So I'm guessing that either he was at the end of his contract or they made a substantial offer and said, hey, we know he's your guy, but let him fight for us because we need a short notice replacement and we'll make it good for you.
And, knee injuries happen, and when I heard that was the reason, it's kind of sad because a knee injury for someone at the stage of his career as Shogun Rua.
That's bad news. Yeah, because you don't have a long time to get surgery or recover from an injury or both. Shogun Rua is not at the point in his career where he can afford a long layoff.
And Okami's won his last 4 fights in the Professional Fighters League, and he's going out of the oven and into the the fryer, so to speak, because he's going from 4 straight wins, and he's fighting a main event fight against
a very dangerous
OSP.
guy in OSP. No, there's no question about it. I mean, you may not like OSP's performance every single time out, but let's not forget that this guy is number 6 in the division and once fought John Jones for the interim title. So this man is not a slouch.
No, it's going to be, as much as the Shogun fight was very intriguing for different reasons, this fight is also very dangerous for OSP because, as I tend to say on this show, Okami's playing with house money here.
Right, and Okami, before he left UFC, was perennial top 15 in the middleweight division, one of the best fighters at middleweight, and he's not a small middleweight. He's 6'2", so making the transition to light heavyweight is not a huge burden for him. In fact, he might actually have such an easy weight cut that he's stronger coming into this fight.
Now it looks like we're going to see Jose Aldo against Ricardo Lamas in December, which I'm curious for that time frame, and I'm curious that they couldn't rush it for the MSG card, but I looked at the MSG card after I read the story, and it's like...
They don't need more fights for that card. That card's pretty stacked.
Yeah, it's like, we're going to put them on here or there. No, it doesn't make sense. That's a quality fight. Don't undersell these fighters. Make them wait another show, and no, the MSG card, don't touch it. Don't add anything else to it. It doesn't need any more gravy on it.
And I really want a fight like Jose Aldo and Ricardo Lamas to get a spotlight all of its own. It would get lost in the shuffle there, and this is such a critical fight at featherweight. This is a fight where either Jose Aldo reasserts his dominance, tries to show that his losses to McGregor and Holloway were flukes, and that there's still the old Jose Aldo in there, and that people should fear and respect him, or the bully finally gets, even though it's not for the title, he finally gets his long-awaited chance to beat up a guy who's former champion. That's like a title fight to him because he's been trying for so long to get to the top of this division. It's such a great fight for featherweight. I love this fight.
Oh yeah, no, it's a great fight for sure. Speaking of Japan, just going back to that real quick, Alan Jabuin is making his debut in the announcer booth.
Mm-hmm.
And since Brian Stan's
we saw Paul Felder make his debut in the broadcast booth at the Fight Night in Pittsburgh.
We did. It's going to be like a revolving carousel of ex-fighters or former fighters or fighters who just retired, and they're going to try to fill the gaps left by Brian Stan. And you want to fill Brian Stan's shoes? Good luck to you.
Right. Well, I also think that a lot of these fighters, they're just, it's because it's a talent agency that oversees UFC now. I think they're looking to try guys out, whether they're active or inactive fighters. If they're under some kind of contract, they're looking at it like, hey, we got these guys. Let's do something with them. They're under contract to us. Let's see what kind of talent they have. Let's see if they're charismatic enough in the announce booth that we could use them in other ways, like movie roles, TV roles, broadcasting roles for other sports. Let's see what these guys have.
So I have another news story here, and I know what you're going to say. I know you for so long, Stevie. I know what you're going to say, but we talked about the Triple G Canelo fight earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the one judge who scored at 118-110.
Total joke.
She's actually scheduled to judge the fights on October 7th for UFC.
Oh, no. Is it Adelaide Byrd?
Yup.
Good grief.
Yeah, the decision to put her on the card was made before the boxing fight, though.
That woman, and it's not just because she's a woman. Let's
Stevie, Jesus.
What?
No, just the way you said that. I'm like, where are you going with this?
I'm trying to say let's not make it a sexist thing, because it's not.
Okay.
She's just no good at judging.
I think you might want to have her take maybe not a sabbatical, but after the fight, maybe they should have like a clause saying if this is a fight that, was close for the majority, if you have 3 other judges score the fight afterwards and just put them in a room and judge the fight, and if none of them can justify a 118-10 score for that fight, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a couple weeks off, just recharge your batteries, come back after a couple weeks, and we'll continue from there. But I don't know. I saw that story and it's like, oh no.
I'm reading an article from sportingnews.com, and this writer's take on it is pretty much my thoughts exactly. Do you mind if I quote?
Go for it.
All right. I want to give credit where it's due. So Brendan Bradford, you get props for this. He was talking about the fight. He says, it was pure, the best fighting, the best for all the marbles, and is so rare in combat sports these days, but the fight lived up to the hype. It was give and take for 12 keenly contested rounds, 36 minutes of high-level action. Then Adelaide Bird happened. Adelaide Bird is a judge. She's not a very good one. She shouldn't have a job after this.
Ooh.
Sorry,
wow.
But that's exactly my thoughts on the whole thing. So I have
Tell me how you really feel.
I'm applauding Mr. Bradford here. Thank you for saying what I've thought about Adelaide Bird for a long time.
They should make
It's definitely not gender. It's just some people are good at looking at a fight and know what they see, and some people are not. Ioana Jędrzejczyk would be a much better judge of this fight than Adelaide Bird, because Ioana Jędrzejczyk would know what she's looking at.
Well, maybe they should start with the Cecil People Award.
Oh, yeah. There's another person you don't necessarily want judging your fight, although I'd trust Cecil Peoples more than Adelaide Bird.
Now, for those who don't recall, the UFC 216 is getting a lot of attention as well, because it also has the main event of Ferguson and Lee for
the interim lightweight title. Speaking of knowing you for a long time, I've known you for a long time, Peter. I know how you feel about these interim titles.
It's a joke. It's just a joke at this point. The interim title fight in the main event and the co-main event will also be a title fight, as it's DJ and Borg.
Yes, which originally was scheduled for Edmonton until Borg got sick.
What? There's sick, and then there's what Borg had. He was sick the entire week leading up to the fight, and don't. The doctors were like, no, you're not going to be able to fight, dude.
Yeah, there's no way. Even if you stuck an IV in his arm, which isn't allowed anyway now under USADA rules, he couldn't have fought on Saturday. No.
All right, so let's transition to this weekend's shows, and let's start with Bellator. Stevie, I believe you spoke to a couple of fighters on this card.
4 fighters from this card, as a matter of fact. I interviewed Aaron Pico, Benson Henderson, Patricky Pitbull, and Roy Big Country Nelson.
Wow, and oh boy, I'm almost scared to ask, but who had the most memorable quotes out for these interviews?
People might be surprised by my answer, but I actually think Aaron Pico gave me some awesome quotes.
Yeah, Pico seems to be very... Now, you know how I'm trying to say this, but he seems very real.
Yeah, and he was very honest in his self-evaluation, and that made for excellent quotes, because he said things to me like, I'm just a little pup in this sport, and I don't want to bite off more than I can chew, but I don't think I have. And I was like, oh man. On a card with Patricky Pitbull, he just called himself a little pup in the sport. The headlines just write themselves.
Yeah, I mean, unless he does the Rick Steiner dog impression during the middle of the fight, I think he's safe.
No, and I think he's also very well aware of the fact that he has something to prove, but he's taking the mentality that anything can happen in a fight, and that's what happened to him at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
And he's basically not going to let himself get caught like that again.
I mean, fighters get caught. It happens. Don't let yourself dwell on a situation like that. You need to put that in the rearview mirror and focus on your task at hand. And Justin Lin, boy, that's not a tomato can there.
No, it's a 7-3 fighter, a guy with 4 wins by submission and 2 knockouts. So he can't, even though Justin Lin may not have had a name coming into this card, that's not a guy that Aaron Pico can overlook, and he's not overlooking him. In fact, he told me, I talked to my managers, I talked to my training partners, I talked to Bob Cook, I talked to Antonio McKee. They don't feel like this is too big of a challenge for me. They feel like I can handle it.
Okay, the person who wrote up this fight card that I'm looking at, I think needs to be fired.
Why?
Because it says Aaron Pico, 5'7" against Justin Lin, 2'5".
Somebody's either playing a joke or just goofed.
I think they just goofed because, 2'5".
Yeah, that's not right.
No, but, Pico, this is a fight where he has to make a statement, and this is the card to make that statement on, because he's lower on the card. But
he's still on the main card. It's not like he got bumped to the prelims.
Yeah, but how close is he to being on the prelims, Stevie?
Well, I'd say if he goes 0-2, that's probably where he's headed.
Yeah, so he needs to make a statement. He needs a win here that will be on highlight reels.
Well, we'll see what happens, but Aaron Pico is known for his wrestling. He was considered to be Olympic level before he signed with Bellator, so if you have 3 straight rounds of takedowns, don't be shocked.
Yeah. What about Yamauchi and Piccolotti?
Well, I liked Piccolotti in this fight because we've seen the level of aggression he brings in the cage. He tends to have wars with people, and he's got a lot of power, and he's also got, as I just alluded to with Aaron Pico, an outstanding wrestling base. So I think Yamauchi is a very dangerous fighter and shouldn't be underestimated, especially when it comes to his ability to tap people out, because Lord knows when you tap out 17 of your 21 wins, you are a beast on the ground. That's Damian Maia level of beasthood in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So it's got to be a cautious but aggressive strategy, which those two things don't sound like they coincide, but he needs to be cautious when it comes to defending the takedowns and not let Yamauchi get him out or get his back, but he also needs to be aggressive and not give Yamauchi a chance to get those takedowns by putting it on him on the feet. And I think Piccolotti is enough of a fighter to do that.
Lorenz Larkin and Paul Daly. And this fight I've had circled on my calendar since it was announced.
Yes, it's definitely one that Paul Daly, I wouldn't say it's a must-win situation for him, but I would say to keep his contendership hopes alive for possibly facing, whoever might be the welterweight champion again down the road, he needs to avenge the loss to Rory McDonald, because I think we can both agree, and this is no disrespect to him, but more of a statement on McDonald. He just got outclassed in that fight with Rory.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much what I was going to say. I try to think of a different way to say it, but no, outclassed is apt.
Right. So if he wants to maintain his standing in one of the most competitive divisions of Bellator, he needs a signature win. He needs another, flying knee knockout. But that's not going to be easy against Lorenz Larkin. Just because he didn't beat Douglas Lima at Madison Square Garden is not to take any tarnish off him, because he still had a very long, hard, competitive fight with Douglas Lima, and that's not easy to do. He's not a guy that's going to let you go 5 rounds with him and really, not just destroy you at some point in those 5. So Larkin proved he earned the title shot, even though some people said he didn't, and he has another chance to prove himself, because if he gets a win over Daly, he's right back in that mix. He obviously isn't going to get a rematch with Lima right away because McDonald would be next up to bat, but he would definitely be the alternate.
Let's move on to Alea and Nelson. Nelson, you have to say he's one of the more entertaining fighters on the roster.
Which Nelson more or less said to me in the interview. He said, you know what, people pay to see me go out there and get in brawls, and I'm going to give them what they paid to see.
And Nelson in a Bellator cage, that's going to be different.
Mm-hmm. And he can't afford to take Javi Ayala lightly. And listen to the interview, read the article that I wrote, and you'll know why. Because Ayala beat a pride-fighting legend in Sergei Karatanov in a matter of seconds. Like, just blew him away with a shot that nobody saw coming. And it may still be that because people were not expecting Ayala to win coming into that fight, that he's not gotten the respect he deserves for it. But this guy is 10-5 overall, which is a good record for any fighter, and he's got a hell of a lot of knockout wins. So Roy Nelson is well aware that if he stands in the pocket and trades with him, that could be a problem, but he's willing to bet he can land a better punch and a harder punch than Ayala. Even though he knocked out Karatanov in 16 seconds, Nelson thinks he can go in there and hang with him.
And let's go to the main event, Stevie. This one is interesting for all the right reasons.
Yes, this is one of those fights where I have a problem because I personally like both of the men in the main event. It's kind of hard to call a winner because I can look at it on a technical basis, but deep in the back of my mind, I'm cheering for both of these guys. I'm not offended whoever wins this fight, and I'm kind of heartbroken for whoever loses this fight. I will say Benson Henderson might need it a little bit more than Patricky. That's the first place I want to go with this because of the fact that in 3 Bellator fights, Benson is 1-2. And he's been in the main event in every one of those fights, and he's fought for a title in 2 out of those 3 fights. But you really need to see Benson Henderson win a main event here to not only maintain his standing in the lightweight division in Bellator, but to justify the fact that he's been in so many main events, because otherwise, why are you paying a guy all that money? And you are paying that guy all that money because he's Benson Henderson, the former UFC and WEC lightweight champion. But as they always say in combat sports, what have you done for me lately? And that is the position Benson is in right now. That as good as he is, he needs to go out there and remind everybody he's that good and prove it. And you can tell when you talk to Benson, he is hungry to prove that. He is even predicting that he will get a finish. He won't say whether it will be a submission or a knockout, but he believes he will get a finish. And he also believes he'll be looking prettier after the fight is over. He believes that if anybody has a black eye, it'll be his opponent and not him. Now, Pitbull is equally confident, and that's where if you were just going to go based on their words and not on their fighting styles, you would have a hard time picking based on their words, because I have never heard Pitbull so confident as he was going into this. And I mean, this is me listening to the sound of his voice as the translator is translating what he says. That confidence comes through even before I heard the translation. And then the translator tells me, I'm going to win by knockout. It's going to happen. It's like, you know what? When you say that and you tell me that every time you've had a good training camp, you've gotten a knockout, and you've had a great training camp, I have a hard time not believing you, because Patricky Pitbull is a knockout artist. He is, of the 2 Pitbull brothers, the one you don't want to stand in front of, because 11 of his 17 wins come by knockout. Now, I know I kept going there for a while.
Wait.
You were waiting to get your words in, so go ahead.
This is the one brother you don't want to fight? I don't want to fight either of them.
I'm not saying you don't want to fight either, but you don't want to stand and trade with Patricky.
I don't want to trade with either of them.
I'm not saying okay with Patricio.
The one you don't want to fight more, I think, is what you're trying to say.
No, I stand by my words here. I would much rather, if I'm a fighter, I would much rather trade on the feet with Patricio than Patricky. I know they both have knockout power. I'm not saying they don't. But Patricky has shown it time and time again, whereas Patricio wins the majority of his finishes on the ground submitting people. That is Patricio's bread and butter. Patricky's is the stand-up game.
Do you think Henderson's height advantage will come into play here?
I almost think it is a disadvantage in some respects.
Oh, really?
Because Patricky, knowing that Benson has a longer reach, is going to be more aggressive and not let him stand at range. I think Patricky actually tries to close that distance and put hands on him before Benson can lope one out. I think that causes Patricky to be even more aggressive.
Oh, that's why they fight the fights. But we should move on to Japan because we're running low on time. And whenever they're in Japan, it's always a big deal. And I like this card overall, to be honest.
Yeah, I think this is a little bit of a sleeper card because there have been so many UFC cards and there are so many more UFC cards that maybe this one just doesn't register. I felt there was a little bit of non-buzz too for Rockhold versus Branch, but that could also be attributed to going against Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. You know, that was just such a monster fight night that somebody was going to lose, which you might also say that with Bellator and UFC. Somebody's going to lose that one, and we don't know who until both cards take place. But it's also a little telling that this one is airing on FXX. It's not on Fox Sports 1. It's not on Fox. It's not on FX. It's on FXX.
It reminds me of Dodgeball, the movie. It's like ESPN 8, the Ocho. What? FXX.
Exactly. So it might go under the radar, but it shouldn't because we've already talked about the greatness of the St. Preux Okami fight and how that is a really intriguing matchup. And at strawweight, we've got an equally intriguing matchup between Claudia Gadelha and Jessica Andrade. Who do you pick in that one, Peter? I'm going to look at the odds before I make mine.
Oh boy, you're starting with Andrade, and I'm going to go with Gadelha on this one. The fighters are pretty much evenly matched as far as, you know, their progress, but I don't know. I think with Andrade, I think this is going to be a tougher fight for her. It could go to a decision, but it's not going to be like a vast difference in odds, but I got Gadelha winning this 2-1. I
think that's fair. I will go with Gadelha as well.
All right. Did we do the pick for Gomi and Maestro Dong Hung Kim?
No, but I'll go with the Donger.
Yeah, I think Gomi, the reason he's still on the roster is for fights in Japan and overseas. And the Donger here, the Maestro, if you will, it's his fight to lose.
I think so too.
Now, as far as the main event goes with OSP and Okami, you have to go with OSP on this one, don't you? I mean, I know Okami's the veteran here. Okami, as I said, is playing with house money, but OSP is basically fighting to stay in the top 6, or I don't think he'll jump into the top 5, but a loss here could definitely hurt him.
No, I would tend to agree with you. I think OSP is, because he is probably the naturally bigger fighter, even though Okami is not a small middleweight, as noted. You look at Ovince St. Preux being a natural light heavyweight at 6'4". If this guy didn't cut weight, he would probably be a heavyweight. So he's got a size advantage. He's got stature in the light heavyweight division. And again, this is a guy that once fought John Jones for the interim title. I think all the things point in his direction. The only thing that could hurt OSP here would be if he goes out and for lack of a better word, shits the bed. And some people are going to think that because they're going to look at him having 3 losses in his last 4 fights, and they're not going to consider that those losses are Volkan Oezdemir, who is now a top-ranked guy himself, Jimmy Manuwa, who is already a top-ranked guy, and John Bones Jones. It's not like he was fighting scrubs his last 4 fights, people.
Did we mention what happened since the show last week? Do we have time to mention what happened, or is that considered old news by now?
No, go ahead and mention it.
So, sometimes I refer to the glove up curse, where news breaks after the podcast airs, and John Jones' B sample came back dirty.
Yeah, I did. I added a little intro to the show to reference that.
So, the fallout from that has been, well, heavy. And Cormier's even gone to Instagram and said, people need to lay off John Jones. I think a lot of people are more disappointed in Jones more than anything else. And Cormier at first didn't want to get the belt back. But for financial reasons, he decided, well, I'll make more money as a defending champion. And rather than fighting for like a unification fight or two fighters fighting for, an uncrowned champion. So I'll just take the belt and I never lost it and go from there. So John Jones is no longer the champion. The California State Athletic Commission stripped him of the title, basically reduced the fight to a no contest.
Yeah, I was about to say, let's not use the word stripped, because in actuality, by making the fight a no contest, he never won the title to begin with. The title is Daniel Cormier's. He never lost it.
Yeah, the fight never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the injuries that Jones suffered in that fight. The fight never happened, though.
Yeah, that's
good. The record says one thing, the body says another.
Yeah, there's a little bit of irony to that, and also to the fact that Cormier was apparently so upset after the loss that he tried to trash his title belts.
Really?
You didn't see this story?
No, this is news to me.
All right, well, let me pull it up here before we start to wrap it up, because I know you said we're running a little long here, but this one is worth looking at. Jesse Holland, one of my fellow writers and an editor at MMA Mania, put up this story, and I'll quote from it. He says, Ultimate Fighting Champion Daniel Cormier gets a new championship strap for each title defense, which means DC has a basement full of hardware on display, with the exception of his UFC titles. That's because the Olympian was so distraught in the wake of his loss to John Jones that he actually tried to give them a heave-ho during an emotional fit.
Oh, boy.
I tried to throw them away, but my wife wouldn't let me. Quote, unquote, Cormier.
Give his wife a big present for saving those belts.
Mm-hmm. Apparently he put them all in the closet because he didn't want to look at them.
That's fine. Put in the closet is one thing, don't throw them out.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Now, Stevie, before we wrap up this week, I do want to mention that there was a wrestling show here in Ottawa that was scheduled for this past weekend, and the show basically was too big for its britches, and what happened was the promotion went belly up before the first show happened, so the two other indie promotions here in Ottawa did a pop-up event with 2 days' notice, and the show is actually being rebroadcast on the radio on CKDJ, and I was asked to do color commentary. So now I can say I'm a broadcast journalist and I've done color commentary.
Yeah, you might want to make a run-in on Thursday night AMP if you've got a little time, if you get off work in time, and tell everybody that story, because it's probably too long to go into here.
It is too long to go in here, but I did, it's a different, as you said off air, it's a different skill set to make the jump from podcast to color commentary, but I had a blast.
I'm sure you did, and I'm glad that C4 and what was the other one? Battle Arts, Battle War?
No, it was Acclaim.
Oh, it was Acclaim. C4 and Acclaim. I'm glad they stepped up and filled in and took over when this other show fell through. And we have to talk about that on Thursday because we interviewed the promoter of that show, so we have to do some follow-up.
All right, so what else is on tap for Thursday night AMP? I know there's a pay-per-view this weekend.
That's right.
No Mercy.
That'll be topic of discussion, as will New Japan's Destruction in Hiroshima card, and, of course, the whole issue with the promotion that fell through. And if we can get on the promoter, maybe we'll get him to explain what happened.
All right, well, for Stevie J, I'm Peter H., the Hardcore Canadian. Thanks for listening, and as I always say, Never leave it to the judges. Good night, everybody.
See ya.
You're listening to Glove Up or Shut Up on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.